Hello guys, good to be here. Welcome back to another video. In this one, my friends, we're going to be testing 22 GPUs, old and new, in Call of Duty Warzone 2. All with gameplay, so you can see that frame stability and stuttering and stuff like that. Also, I managed to fix most of the stuttering issues, like I don't have those huge spikes that you saw previously in my 4080 video, and you're seeing it right here. It feels much smoother than it did before, and that's because I disabled the on-demand texture streaming. That makes a huge difference in stability, so I recommend you to do that as well if you are experiencing stuttering issues. Now, this is a huge video, so it can get a little bit repetitive since I tested pretty much the same thing in every single GPU here for consistency. So there are timestamps for you to choose whatever GPU you want to watch here in this one. You don't need to watch the entire thing, of course. If you do, well, thank you so much. I also tried to cover the most adequate settings for each GPU tested here today. So that means that for the 4080 that we're watching right now, 4K max settings with and without DLSS. And with a ton of these GPUs, I actually tested like FSR and DLSS as well, aside from the preferred preset. So this is just a complete benchmark, I would say, with gameplay and everything. Finally, I tested everything in this intensive area. This has a lot of water. Water is the most intensive thing in this game because of the water physics mainly. And this has a good blend between like water inside of little houses and stuff like that, a little village or whatever this is. Then at the end of the benchmarks, you see a bit of vegetation as well, which is really intensive. And in the middle of it, there is a slightly less intensive area as well, where the FPS jump up considerably. So right now we're seeing 4K DLSS quality. I think this is probably the way to go with the RTX 4080 because you do get way more FPS and, you know, at 4K resolution, quality DLSS looks amazing and it feels amazing as well. It felt really smooth here, even though there are some little frame time spikes there in the graph. So I could definitely recommend these settings right here. It's a high refresh rate experience, even in super intensive areas. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. I paired this GPU with a Ryzen 7 5800X 3D and 32 gigabytes of RAM running at 35-33 megahertz. All of the specs are down below in the description as well. And I didn't pair every single GPU with the same system. I paired them with like an adequate system, I guess. But I really wanted to test different systems here today, so you can see that those little stutters and little frame time stability issues are not system dependent or OS dependent as well. Also, just take a look at that power consumption on the 4080. It's amazing, guys. Wow. All right, I'll let the rest of the benchmark run, and I'll be back with a commentary again to talk a little bit about the performance and stability and stuff like that with the next GPU. Let's go. Alright, next up is the RTX 3080 Ti, and this is also a high-end GPU from the last generation, but still a really good beast at 4K gaming. So I tested it at 4K max settings as well as 1440p max settings. And as you can see at 4K, it is dropping from 60 FPS at native resolution. 69 FPS average, by the way, for a second there. But yeah, it is really intensive, this game, especially in the water. I wish there was a way to disable those water physics, because that's what wrecks performance, obviously, but there isn't for now. Even on the lowest settings, as we'll see in some of these GPUs, it still has water physics and it wrecks the performance completely, which is insane. Now, enabling DLSS will definitely make this GPU playable here at 4K resolution, which is great, but I doubt it will be a high refresh rate experience. You know, I mean, we're getting 74 FPS on average here. Maybe with DLSS, we're gonna get like 100 or something like that. I don't remember. I've tested this a couple of days ago. Actually, me and Digimoon tested some of the GPUs separately, so I don't know what to expect in some of these tests. But yeah, you can see that even here, by the way, with the vegetation and stuff like that, it still drops drops a little bit. It's worrisome, the performance at native resolution with 3080 Ti. But enabling DLSS puts us above 100 frames per second, as you can see, so you can still play at 4K resolution very comfortably with the 3080 Ti. See that? It doesn't even drop from like 90 or 89 FPS there in the water, which is awesome to see, and it's just a great experience now. I myself, if I had a 3080 Ti, I wouldn't upgrade for this game to like a 4080 or a 4090. It still provides an amazing experience here, and the graphics still look really, really good as well. Also, that power usage, yeah, it consumes a lot more than that 4080. So the 40 series, although on paper they might seem like they're very power hungry, they're not really. In practice, the 30 series were much more power hungry. Now we're getting to the forest area, drops near 100 frames per second, not bad at all. Let's go now to 1440p max settings. Okay, native resolution once again. And it seems like it's getting slightly better FPS than 4K using DLSS on quality here on the 3080. Dropping down into the water, 90s, 100s. Yeah, it's all right. It's not terrible. It's not a super high refresh rate experience, and actually the 6900 XT did a heck of a lot better job than this in this game at native resolution, by the way. We'll see, it got, I think, 125 or 135 FPS average using these settings, which is insane, because this was actually a little bit faster when it released than the 6900 XT in some games. I think this game actually favors AMD a lot. From what I've seen as well. Now, in least intensive areas, it jumps up to around 130 frames per second. That's pretty good. So it's a really smooth experience. Uh-oh. I'm getting shot at a lot in this one, damn. And that's the thing. These people just don't leave me alone, usually. I'm just benchmarking here. I want to make it happen for you, show you the settings, show you the different areas and stuff, and they don't leave me alone. It's very annoying. It took me a really long time to record all of these clips. But hey, we actually got him in the end. Now it's 1440p with DLSS on quality, and it's dropping into the 120s. So this is pretty decent now. Of course, like, it's not really that impressive for a 3080 Ti to only be able to achieve a high refresh rate experience at 1440p max settings with the DLSS enabled, so it shows that this game needs some serious optimization. But again, you gotta remember that this is worst case scenario, basically what we're seeing right here. We're just in a town that has a lot of water physics and stuff like that around us, so it's super intensive. Still, I expected better from these GPUs here in this one, and I'm quite sad at the performance. Also, Digimoon is following us there, just noticed that. Yeah, we made some of these videos playing in the same lobby, and once I actually killed her because we went solos at the same time. And well, she just dropped right beside me, and I was like, what the hell is this guy doing here? There's no weapons here. Why would somebody drop here with me? And it was her. I laughed my ass off in that one, actually. (1440p Ultra now with the 3060 Ti. And this is struggling quite a bit, as you can see. Usually 3060 Ti can play these games absolutely fine, but as you can see, it is dropping from 60 FPS. See, it's very concerning, isn't it? Of course, with DLSS, it will be fixed. We will be above 60 FPS all of the time. And I will also test this one at 1080p resolution. But yeah, if you want native 1440, it gets rough here with the 3060 Ti, unfortunately, and I've never seen it struggle this much, actually, aside from like in Plague Tale Requiem, which I am yet to make a video on with this card as well. Hey, it is still playable. It doesn't drop every time you're near water. It's just in more intensive scenarios, basically. Oh yeah, and I just noticed Crisp is being hunted, right? I'm being hunted in this one. That happened a ton of times. I just dropped, and I was the one being hunted out of 150 people. I don't understand. Like, I'm doing a benchmark here. I need stability and stuff. I don't need people shooting at me, and yet I'm always being hunted. Well, not always, but you get the idea. Anyways, approaching this little bit of a forest area, getting 50s and 60s. Yeah, it's rough. But enabling DLSS, 100 FPS, around that. That's a good bump up in performance. Everything looks a little bit sharper as well. Maybe a little bit less detailed in this one, actually, because I could see some smudgy textures here when using DLSS. Oh, also, that wasn't a stutter, that was just server lag. That was another big thing while testing all of these GPUs. The game is just terrible. Sometimes the servers were unplayable, you know? A lot of people complained about it in the chat as well, and we will see some interesting chat reactions, to say the least, to lag. Anyway, being hunted, and they're very, very close to me right now. And yeah, we're getting drops into like the 90s and 80s, I guess, near the water. Not a problem, I think. Still pretty decent performance for a 3060 Ti. And if you don't mind DLSS, and I bet it will look decent at native 1440p resolution, yeah, this is probably the way to go with 1440p if you want that higher res than 1080p. And I actually recommended this GPU for a lot of people at 1440p, and I still do. You know, it's a great card for 1440p gaming. It's just this game is terribly optimized once again. It's super, super hard to run. And by the way, these are ultra settings, not maxed out settings. Now, 1080p resolution using the same ultra settings. Also, textures were on normal. Oh, this is where I killed Digimon. Look at that. She was so mad because we were trying to get inside of a game without lag for a long time. And as soon as she dropped, I killed her, and she was like, "Oh, look at this guy! Of course they are killing me already." It was really, really funny, actually. We should have recorded it. Anyways, 1080p Ultra seems to be getting similar FPS to DLSS quality at 1440p, and that's a trend that we will see here in this video. Whenever I test 1440p and 1080p, the quality DLSS stuff at 1440 is usually around the same as 1080p without DLSS native res. So if you have a 1080p monitor, you're good to go. There's a guy right there. Okay, look at that. He just stood there. Did I kill him? Yes, I did, of course. I actually didn't edit every single GPU here in this video. Digimon actually edited some of them. Yeah, by the way, she is working here full-time in the channel as well. She's helping me a lot, and she's making these videos possible, because I could never have made this for today, at least, in such a short period of time, like 3 or 4 days, without her. So, thanks to Digimon as well. Anyways, foresty area, 80s to 90s, it's not bad. Enabling quality DLSS at 1080p, things are starting to look really, really smudgy, actually. I wish the implementation of DLSS in this game was looking a bit better, because it's pretty meh, I think. And as you can see, dropping in the water, it is a high refresh rate experience all the way through, I think, even on ultra settings. So if you must have those super high FPS and good visual fidelity, this is probably the way to go. But I mean, you really need a native 1080p monitor. If you're running a higher resolution panel and use these settings, it will look really bad, like it did for me, because I ran everything on a 4K panel, everything with the 5800X 3D at least, and it was looking pretty terrible, honestly. Also, do you guys mind these little pauses while I'm talking? Like, sometimes we need a little bit of a pause, right? Otherwise, I'll be voiceless when I finish this video. Oh, boy. I got to the forest area, we got a little bit of a stutter there before we reached this part. Also, YouTube compression is gonna wreck this thing completely here. Only in this area though, so that's fine, but I'm sorry about that, the graphics will look terrible there. Now, let's move on to the 2060. 1080p balanced was the preset, so it's basically medium settings. And in the water, it drops to the 60s, not terrible. It might actually drop from 60 here and there in some other occasions, but it's not awful, and this is still native resolution, so the 2060 is doing a decent job here. I will also test it with DLSS. That will probably give us a much better experience here with this card. But yeah, so far, it's a playable experience, not really that competitive. Also, if you guys want me to test all of these GPUs again, but with competitive settings, like low settings, some of them will already be on low settings, but yeah, these higher end GPUs on low settings for competitive play, let me know down in the comments. I will make that happen, or maybe I'll just test some of these GPUs, the most popular ones, separately in a lot of settings and resolutions, more than what I tested here, of course. Yeah, let me know if that's something that you guys would be interested in, and I will make that happen. Now, getting close to the foresty area with a lot of vegetation, drops into the 70s. Not a problem, I think. 2060 is doing a decent job still, even with those 6 GB of VRAM. Now, enabling quality DLSS puts us at around 100 frames per second, as expected from what we saw previously, of course. Dropping into the water, 80, not a problem. Again, it looks really smudgy. Let me know if, to you guys that are running 1080p monitors, are you liking the experience with DLSS? Is it seeable? Is it enjoyable? Is it sharp and detailed? Because to me, at least, on such a big monitor, it looks really bad. But yeah, that's not why we're here. Anyways, we're just taking a look at the performance today. And I'm being hunted again. Of course I am. Yeah, so apparently the 2060 is getting pretty similar FPS to the 3060 Ti, but the 3060 Ti was, of course, at 1440p Ultra with DLSS quality, and this one is at 1080p balanced with DLSS quality. So quite a big difference in quality there, but the FPS are pretty alright in both of them. You can play absolutely fine in this game with an RTX GPU. We will also take a look at the 3050 after this one. That should be interesting. And here we go, 1080p balanced on the 3050, getting 80s. Alright, not terrible. I think it did drop from 60 FPS near the water though. Let's check it out. Okay, 60 flat right there. Yeah, 59. I was pretty sure it did drop a little right there. But, you know, it's not really that concerning if it only drops to 59, honestly. I'd be fine with this experience anyways. 78 FPS average so far feels pretty damn decent. Again, that frame time could be better, but there's nothing you can do about it, and aside from like wait for an optimization patch, which is much needed in this game, by the way. But honestly, it didn't feel terrible. Yes, there are a lot of frame time variations there, but they weren't really noticeable, or very noticeable at least. And especially while playing with high refresh rate panels, it definitely felt really smooth. So I see why a lot of people say that this is very, very smooth to them, because it is. Even though there is some stability issue here, it feels all right-ish. And now the foresty area, once again. It's not really a big forest, but we got a ton of bushes, and it's intensive, and it's dropping from 70 FPS. Now, quality DLSS with 69 sharpness. I used 69 sharpness for everything here. It could also look better with higher values or lower values as well. If you play around with that a little bit, you could find some setting that actually looks a little bit better here with DLSS. And now instead of dropping into the 50s, it only drops into like the 80s or something. So it's much, much better. And it's surprisingly similar to what we saw with the RTX 2060. Usually the 2060 is much faster than the 3050. But in this game, the 3050 is holding up really well, actually. I am impressed with its performance here, even though it's not really awesome, because it's only balanced settings, medium basically. It is pretty impressive that it can keep up with the 2060. I expected 2060 to be way better than this. It's usually like 15% faster or something like that. And this is only being like 5% slower at the moment. So not a bad result whatsoever. Oh yes, and the 3050 is an 8GB model. It's the Gigabyte Eagle version of the card. It's not the 4GB because that's only available in laptops. So there you go. Moving on to the AMD GPUs. This is a 6900 XT at 4K max settings, and wow, is it looking amazing. That frame time stability is a little bit worse than what we saw previously with the 3080 Ti. Like, those spikes are a little bit more defined, but still not very noticeable, honestly. And as you can see, it can actually keep it up above 60 frames per second all of the time, even in the water scenarios. So this is insane. Oh yes, of course, this was also a problem. Sometimes there was a public event going on and I couldn't get inside of the house for some reason. Really weird stuff. Yeah, people are complaining about lag in the chat now. It's just how it is. The Warzone things. I am very impressed with the performance of the 6900 XT here. I just said it's 69 right there in the graph because, well, the memes. 69, yes sir. Unfortunately, this one doesn't have any DLSS, but it does have FSR. But I did not test FSR with the 6900 XT because it's FSR 1.0. It doesn't look very good, honestly. And it was already a decent experience at 4K native, which is insane to think about. The 4K native 6900 XT has aged a bit better than 3080 Ti, especially for this game. 1440p maximum settings is next. We're already getting shot at, and it is a high refresh rate experience. Once again, much better than what the 3080 Ti did in this one. It doesn't even drop from 100 frames per second in the water. It's great. It's really, really great performance. Now, to be fair, this is a heavily overclocked RX 6900 XT. It's the MSI Gaming Z Trio. I didn't overclock it manually, but, well, it comes factory overclocked, of course. So, yeah, there's that as well. The 3080 Ti was just a stock version, Founders Edition, you know. But still, I doubt an overclock of the 3080 Ti would put it much, much closer to this one, you know. So this is just insane. 136 FPS average so far. This is great stuff from AMD. I can't wait to see what the 7000 series has to offer. And also, please, AMD, give me a 7000 series GPU for me to test. I contacted you, but you guys just don't answer me. I don't understand. Maybe I'll have to buy one. We'll see. 120s. It drops quite considerably here, but not a problem. And we actually got 140 on average there. I thought it was actually slower than that. That's crazy. 6600 XT now with 1440p ultra settings, getting 60s to 70s. Yeah, at 1440p with this card, I wouldn't really play like this, honestly, guys. It drops from 60 FPS very often in these intensive scenarios, and you're gonna come across water inevitably in this game because it's scattered all over the map. They really want you to see those water physics, you know. Oh, look at that, 69 FPS on average, that's perfect. Anyways, AMD also targets this GPU at 1080p resolution. They don't say it's a 1440p gaming card, but I've seen a lot of people in my comments in the 6600 XT videos saying that they play at 1440p. So here we are, 1440p test for you guys. I would probably lower the settings, but again, I think I will have a few comments asking for competitive settings, so I'll leave that to that video, of course. It's gonna be fun to check it out as well on competitive. Yeah, it drops even here in the foresty area into the 50s at times. So, not recommended with this. With FSR, it would actually be very playable, though. 1080p ultra settings, this is how you should play it with the 6600 XT. Around 100 FPS once again, so it's getting around the same FPS as like the 3050 and the 2060 with DLSS enabled on balanced. And this is at 1080p native ultra settings. So quite a considerable jump even from like a 3050 or a 2060. That's very nice to see here. The AMD GPUs, again, are really, really good in this game. Now, of course, this is to be expected coming from a 6600 XT because, well, even the 6600 is much, much faster than the 3050, but it's the same price as those GPUs that I mentioned. So it's interesting to compare these in performance. You should definitely go with an AMD Ryzen 6600 or 6600 XT instead of like a 3050. Like, no question about it. Sometimes these GPUs are even cheaper than the 3050. So I don't know what Nvidia is doing with this card, the 3050, you know, and not this card. But they seriously need to drop prices on that GPU. I think maybe it's just the demand for Nvidia, but I don't know. These are really, really good value GPUs at the moment, the 6000 series. Now, the RX 580, the old boy, is right here playing at 1080p minimum settings preset. Not the absolute minimum settings, but it's the preset, and it still drops from 60 FPS. This is a very heartbreaking thing to see, you know, because it's the 580, it's a legendary GPU. It should be able to play these games at 60 plus FPS, at least at minimum settings, but it isn't. At least it gets 69 on average though, so that's perfect. Well, not anymore. It's very sad to see 69 and then it going up, you know. It's just, I don't like it. I wish we could play every single game at 69 FPS locked with the RX 580. And fun thing is, actually back when I had a 980 Ti, I used to lock the FPS to 69 in all of the games. I don't know why 69, I guess it's just the meme. But yeah, when I wasn't recording anything for YouTube, I would actually lock it to 69 because I had a 60 Hz monitor. 69 felt a little bit snappier than 60 for some reason, and I just played like that. It's interesting. Anyway, 76 FPS average, 32.1% lows. It's okay. In this one, I actually enabled FSR Ultra Quality at 1080p. It looks way more pixelated and shimmery, but at least it puts us above 60 FPS all of the time. So that's great to see. It still drops into the lower 60s, as you can see. It's not perfect, and it might actually drop here and there in more intensive scenarios. For example, if you threw a smoke or a kill streak, it would probably drop from 60, near the water, that is. Like, if you throw a smoke or a kill streak outside of the water, it's fine. It's actually less intensive than the water. But, well, if you have a 580, I think it's probably time to upgrade. As you saw, the RX 6600 XT just provides a massively better experience at 1080p. Chances are you have a 1080p monitor with a card like this, so I really think you should upgrade. It's time. Maybe if you held on to it for so long, you might want to hold on to it until the 7000 series hits the market, so everything is shaken up and the last generation drops in price. That could happen, and I really want it to happen, but I don't know if it will. Good experience here with the 580 overall. 560 at minimum settings and 720p. Now these are actually the absolute minimum settings in the game, not the minimum preset. We actually made sure to lower everything to the minimum it can go, and it still drops, as you can see, and it stutters a bit more. It was more noticeably stuttery than what we saw previously. Also, the RX 580 and the RX 560 were actually running on a 5700G processor, not on the 5800X 3D, by the way, with 16 gigabytes of RAM. But that's not what's causing the more instability issues here. It's just, well, the GPUs themselves are pretty old and kind of outdated for a game like this. That's not to say that you can't play this game with the RX 560. As you can see, we're getting a perfect 69 there. Not anymore. It's just not going to be a super competitive experience, and it looks quite rough at 720p. It's going to be really difficult to spot people at the distance and stuff like that, which is, of course, important in such a big map like this one. So you might want to run around with a scope in your weapon. Going down to the RX 550 now, 720p minimum settings with FSR set to ultra quality, and we got El Crispo there in the screen in front of us. Oh my gosh, it is terrible, guys. And we paired this one, as you can see, with the 4770K CPU. That's an i7 from 2013, 4th gen, of course. It's not overclocked or anything, but it's not bottlenecking these lower-end GPUs whatsoever. It's still doing a pretty decent job. I thought it would probably not be enough for 60 FPS in these games, but apparently it kind of is. Especially an overclocked 4770K, so I'm impressed about that. It's getting less than 60 FPS, but you know, since this is comparable in performance, or at least was comparable in performance to the GT 1030, I mean, the fact that the game launches and actually sort of runs with acceptable FPS for a low-end gamer, it's not terrible, right? I wish we could actually see 30 plus all of the time at native 720p, but that wasn't really the case. So FSR ultra quality is needed in this one at 720 resolution. It looks really, really bad. Anyways, moving on to the 1660 Ti and back to the R7 5800X 3D. Yes, tons of numbers. And we're playing at 1080p basic settings. Also, I'm sorry about the discrepancies in the size of the on-screen display there, but hopefully everything is still seeable, you know. And using these settings with the 1660 Ti, you can see that it runs pretty well, above 60 FPS. I also tried the balanced settings and it was dropping from 60, so that's why I chose basic here. Yeah, not a problem. This doesn't have DLSS, of course, unfortunately, so you really need to lower the settings to achieve 60 plus all of the time. There's no upscalers here that will save you, aside from FSR, but that looks terrible, again, because it's FSR 1.0. Really hope that they introduce FSR 2 in this game, because it would make a big difference. It would perform better while looking pretty similar to like the first implementations of DLSS. So it's not terrible, right? Yeah, I don't know why they just implemented 1.0. But we're deviating a little bit from the 1660 Ti. It's consuming around 120 watts, which is exactly what it should consume. Some of these GPUs consumed a lot less than their rated TDPs in this game. But hey, it's getting around 100 FPS on average. Very, very nice experience indeed. Now, it's the 1650 at 1080p minimum settings, and absolute minimum settings, by the way, not the preset. It's very rough, as you can see. Already it will drop, yep, into the 40s and lower 40s. Damn, that is rough, guys. Wow, you guys with 1650s are probably thinking of upgrading it, right? Oh my goodness. Yeah, I mean, it's just this game, you know, it's so intensive, guys. I wish we could disable the water physics as well on the lowest settings. Why can't we disable it, Call of Duty developers? Please let us, because this is just not very acceptable performance. And you want the game, supposedly you want the game to be playable on the vast majority of hardware out there. So the fact that a 1650 can't really play it at 1080p above 60 FPS all of the time, it's very concerning. It was actually capable of getting those frames in Warzone 1, although by the end of it, it kind of dropped sometimes into the 50s, because that game got less and less optimized as the years gone by. But yeah, it was a decent experience in that one, and in this one, I wouldn't really enjoy this too much, especially near the water. Over here, still dropping into the 50s. Yeah, I really hope this doesn't follow the footsteps of Warzone 1 and gets more intensive, that's for sure. We just enabled FSR 1.0 on ultra quality, and it's getting 80 frames per second now. That's much better. Again, it looks super shimmery now, but if that means that we get mostly 60 plus, I would go with it. As you can see, it still drops though, but it's not to a very concerning value like it was previously in the 40s and stuff. So for a 1650, I think this would be acceptable performance at native resolution, not using FSR. And I really hope that the developers aren't getting lazy and just thinking, oh, we're just gonna add FSR or DLSS and make people run with those technologies because it actually runs well with them. Yeah, it doesn't look anywhere close to native resolution anyways. Yeah, it kind of feels like some developers in some games are thinking that way, especially like in Plague Tale or Requiem. That game is so damn intensive. I can't stop thinking about it. It's also beautiful, way more beautiful than this one, but it's really, really intensive. For reference, 3050 can't get 30 plus FPS at 1080p low every single time. So yeah, it's very, very concerning, right? Anyways, foresty area or vegetation area, can't really call this a forest, right? It's getting 70s to 80s, sometimes it drops from 70, not bad. .1080 Ti is next, and it's paired with the Ryzen 7 5800X 3D again, although that CPU is blue because I forgot to change it back after making another video on the 4080. Anyway, it's dropping at 1440p balanced. Okay, well, it's 1440p, so it's not terrible. There are some kill streaks going on there at the distance, very interesting. Those aren't really being too intensive, I think, so I just ran this benchmark run anyways, like this. And, well, a little bit of variety is always great to see sometimes. Not really to compare things around, but, you know, it doesn't really affect our FPS too much. Yeah, basically you're gonna struggle at 1440p with a 1080 Ti unless you play at like low settings or minimum settings, but I kind of wanted to focus more in the quality, visual fidelity experience here in this video. Outside of watery areas, you can get up to 90 or almost 100 frames at times, which is great to see, but again, water wrecks everything, so you will need to drop the settings or the resolution. That's what I did here. I tested this one also at 1080p resolution, which worked quite well, so that's why I went with balanced settings. As you can see, even in the foresty area, it doesn't drop from 60, it's just the water, you know. Now, it's 1080p balanced. I actually forgot to show the settings, but it is at 1080p, and it's getting around 100 frames per second. That's a frame rate that we've seen already a ton of times. Whenever it gets 100 FPS on average, that means that you can actually get 60 plus even in the water. So that's interesting to know as well. And the 1080 Ti can do a pretty decent job like this. It's actually losing to the 2060. and 3050, I think. Maybe those were with DLSS. I don't remember properly, guys. But if it is losing to the 3050 and 2060, that's very, very concerning, because this is a beast of a card. In all of the games, it performs way better than the 3050. It's getting concerning for these 10 series GPUs. They're not really as well optimized for games as they used to be. Or should I say, the games are not really very well optimized to take advantage of these old technologies anymore. And yeah, the 1080 Ti has kind of fallen off grace here. It can still play a very, very enjoyable game here at 1080p resolution, though, don't get me wrong, but yeah, it's a little bit concerning. Anyways, GTX 1080, not the Ti, at 1080p balanced preset. Will it get 60 plus all of the time? Please, don't let the 1080 fall off grace, game. Come on. Oh, 59 right there, guys. I mean, it's only 59, so again, it's not terrible. But I expected better once again from the 1080. When I actually started this, Digimon was there. Oh boy, I saved her. Look at that. Beautiful stuff. The romance is real. Anyways, when I first started this in the warm-up with the GTX 1080, I was really impressed because we weren't near water and it was getting 120 FPS or something like that. And I remember telling Digimon, wow, look at this. The 1080 still packs a big punch. And I actually tested this before I tested 1080 Ti, by the way. But yeah, then we got to the water area, it dropped into the 60s, 70s and stuff. It's not really that impressive, but it's great that you can still play this game with a GTX 1080 comfortably at 1080p. I think you won't really have an issue. It doesn't feel stuttery either, so there's that. And look at that power consumption. Remember the days when the 80 series were 180 watt TDP GPUs? Yeah, those are gone. Speaking of Argonne, we're in Argonne Forest. I'm kidding, of course. That's in Battlefield 1. But yeah, it's dropping in the 70s. Not too bad. GTX 1060 6GB is next at 1080p minimum settings preset, not absolute minimum settings. It's getting 70s, as you can see. It will drop definitely from 60 frames per second and even 50, I believe. Let's check it out. Oh boy, yep, 40 FPS there. Very concerning. I believe the RX 580 only dropped into the lower 50s, so it's a way better experience with that card compared to this one in this game. I guess the game just takes a lot better advantage of AMD GPUs and their architectures, because in terms of compute power, the RX stuff is way better than these old GPUs from Nvidia. That's why they were way, way more expensive during the mining craze, because every miner was just snapping them up to put in mining rigs. That's why my RX 570 died twice. I actually bought two 570s. I can't really test it in this video because it's dead. Okay, probably too many years of mining killed them. When they were on my hands, the temps were good and I replaced thermal paste and stuff like that, but yeah, I couldn't really save the cards, unfortunately. Anyway, moving on. 1060, 69 FPS average right there, perfect stuff. It drops a lot. It's still a playable experience though, don't get me wrong, but once again, this GPU can play a lot of games at 1080p, low settings above 60 FPS, absolutely fine, even on medium settings at times, and in this one, it's dropping too much, and it's quite stuttery as well here in the foresty area. Anyways, now using FSR Ultra Quality, and we're now in the 80s and 70s. Good bump up in performance. It looks very shimmery and terrible though. Yeah, 1060 is not what it used to be, unfortunately. And it's getting around the same FPS minimums as the RX 580, if I remember correctly. Definitely, once again, a very good advantage for the RX 580 in this one. The 580 also consumed way more. Again, this is the kind of performance that I expected from native resolution, and I'm quite bummed out that it's only possible with FSR 1.0. The real problem here is 1.0, you know? If it was 2.0, it would probably look close to native res, but no, it's not, so yeah. Anyway, getting up to 100 frames per second in less intensive areas, that's alright. There's a guy right there. Will I kill him? Or will Digimon kill him? Yes. Good job, Digimon. Very nice. No need to reload. 68 bullets left. I actually remember saying that to her. I was watching her making this benchmark. 1050 Ti, very popular GPU. And playing at 720p minimum settings. Absolute minimum, by the way. Yep. It is rough, guys. It is slightly faster. Oh my god, that's a lot of stuttering looking at the water. It's slightly faster than the RX 560 in this game, which is not terrible by any means. But when these GPUs came out, the 560 was way slower than 1050 Ti. I remember a lot of people commenting in my videos at the time, 2016, I believe, asking me what they should go with, RX 564 gig or GTX 1050 Ti, and I always said 1050 Ti. And even here in this game, which is better optimized towards the AMD stuff, as we saw so far, yeah, the 1050 Ti is still just a little bit better than the 560, I think. Oh boy, we're almost getting 60. Now, there we go. There we go. Can we finish one of these runs with 69 FPS on average? That would be perfect, you know. We haven't seen that yet. It always goes up into the 70s, the averages. And it's always 70 and 1% lows. Very interesting. Anyway, you can play this game with a 1050 Ti. I've seen some comments of people telling me, oh, I'm getting 100 FPS with 1050 Ti. Well, that's absolute BS. Now it's the GTX 1050 at 720p minimum settings. This, well, it just gets really rough here. Dropping into the lower 30s in the water. Not a good experience anymore, guys. I just... It's terrible. This 2GB card, it's actually the first time it's showing up in the channel, by the way. I just bought it, and it's gonna be in a Sunday video in the near future, of course. It's also a single slot card from Inno3D. Very, very interesting. I overpaid for it, but I really like the looks of it, and I can't wait to show it to you guys and benchmark it in more games that it actually can play properly. Still, no major stuttering even though we're playing with a 2GB card now, guys. It's 2GB of VRAM, and yes, we can see a few more frame time spikes here and there, and more noticeable ones, but it's not completely awful. I totally expected a stuttery mess coming from a 2GB card in this one, and that's not the case, which is great. Now I went with FSR Ultra Quality as well with this one, and not the 1050 Ti, because I feel like with the 1050 Ti you should play at native 720p, even though it's not a perfect experience. That's where it shines the most, because whenever you enable Ultra Quality FSR at this resolution, it looks really terrible, guys, and it makes it really hard to spot people right in front of you sometimes. If they are hiding on a bush or something, you won't really see anybody, so you will be at a massive disadvantage playing at these settings because of the visuals. Now with the 1050, I would enable Ultra Quality FSR because, well, it was a terrible experience in terms of FPS and stability previously, and now it's much better. You get 60s at times. That's great coming from 1050, I think. In the water, of course, it drops tremendously, but, you know, it's not horrible. It's definitely not the most horrible thing ever. Now getting close to the vegetation, it's still in the 60s. That's very interesting to see. So the water is just the absolute FPS wrecker of this card. Even here, it drops sometimes, but it's not really a major issue. Now, 1030, 720p minimum settings, FSR, ultra quality. Jesus, that's really, really choppy. It's not stuttery still, which is very impressive with a 10-year-old system almost, and a super slow GPU. Oh god, but yeah, it does drop a lot from 30 FPS. The RX 550, if you bought that card back in the days instead of the 1030, they used to cost the same, believe it or not. That delivered a way better experience, night and day basically. This is just terrible. I would not install this game with a 1030. Now, the interesting thing is, even with the water and stuff like that, this is performing better than Warzone 1 on the GT 1030, because Warzone 1 didn't run above 30 FPS at 720p. Of course, granted, we have FSR ultra quality, but still, it's really impressive to me that you can play this game with a 1030 and not Warzone 1 unless you play the other one at 800 by 600, which looks worse than this with FSR, by the way. Now the question is, would you guys play like this with the GT 1030? I definitely wouldn't, especially considering that it dropped into the 20s previously. It's just a terrible experience, more stuttery than previous GPUs as well, and not enjoyable. 18 FPS, 1% lows, you know. Next up is the Titan X. This was also with the 5800X 3D, but the CPU was blue there in the graph because I forgot to change it. But anyways, it's getting pretty decent FPS at 1080p minimum settings preset with the normal textures, because this is a 12 gigabyte GPU. I really wanted to include this one in this video because it's from a very old architecture, Maxwell, from the 900 series basically, but it has a ton of VRAM, so I wanted to see if that VRAM amount would actually benefit here in this game a lot, and it definitely does. You can make the game look pretty decent on absolute lowest settings and normal textures, and it's not dropping too much, is it? Yeah, that's very impressive for the little Titan right here. And if you look at that power consumption, it's nowhere near those 250 watts. So this game doesn't really fully utilize these old GPUs, or even the newer ones sometimes in the case of the 4080. But yeah, these old GPUs, if you notice, the power utilization is not as high as it is in other titles. So it indicates that they're not really optimized to run in this game, basically. And it's to be expected once again. Even though these still support the latest Nvidia drivers, they're just not really putting too much effort optimizing the games for these. GTX 970 legendary card is next at 1080p minimum settings, and this is the preset, by the way. Getting 60s, yeah, dropping into the 50s already. That's a bit concerning. You can also see a bit of fluctuation there in the GPU usage department, but that's just because of the little frame times that we see. It's not really a CPU bottleneck, of course. This is running on a 5700G after all. Yeah, basically near the water, it's gonna get like 50s with the 970, and outside of the water, it's gonna get 60s, which is not terrible, but you gotta use FSR with the 970. We're in those days, my friends. 970 is not legendary anymore. Well, I guess I'll still give it the legendary status, but not for this game. It's kind of terrible in this one. Once again, lots of fluctuation in the GPU department. Now with ultra quality FSR enabled in the minimum settings, we are seeing 70s, 60s again, not dropping into the 50s in this area anymore, so that's great to see. That's definitely an improvement. Dropping into the water still drops tremendously into the 40s, guys. It's time to upgrade that GTX 970 if you have one of those. Unless you want to play at a lower resolution to get 60 plus FPS all of the time. This is not good. Okay, this is just... yeah. I do not like this experience that the 970 can provide. Most of the time, at least. Some people might find this very playable if you're used to like GTX 1050s, GT 1030s and stuff. This is a massive upgrade. And for other games, I could still see myself recommending a 970 for the right price, like 70 or 80 bucks, something like that. But in these newer titles, it struggles a lot, and it's just not worth it. If you're looking for an upgrade, 3060 Ti, RX 6600 XTs and stuff like that, those would be amazing upgrades for something like this. Next up is the GTX 960 at low settings, or lowest settings actually, in 720p resolution. And oh, this is the one where I killed her. She was benchmarking the 960. Oh, what a shame. We could have gone together. But that's cheating in Warzone, actually. We would probably end up being banned for teaming up or something. I'm glad I killed her. Anyway. Ooh, massive drops here into the 40s, guys. So what the 970 did at 1080p, this is doing at 720p. Massive difference there in performance between the 960 and the 970. This is also a 2 gig version of the card. With a 4 gig, it would probably get you like 5 more FPS or something like that and be a little bit more stable as well. Yeah, the 960 is getting pretty old and outdated for these newer titles, guys. It's a very big shame to see, but that's life. You know, things get obsolete over time, and although this is still definitely not obsolete, like a GT 1030, for example, in gaming, it's not providing a very good experience. These graphics look terrible as well. It's kind of getting the same FPS as the 1050 Ti, a little bit slower than that, which is to be expected. These perform very, very similarly to each other, and it's getting around the same FPS as like 1050 with FSR. Now finally, the last GPU being tested here is the GTX 750 Ti, minimum settings with FSR Ultra quality. And unfortunately, this one looked like it was going to be decent, but it just locked up and it didn't want to play the game whatsoever. It stood like that forever until the game actually crashed. And I don't know what's going on with that, because I've heard of some people, I've not seen them yet, but I've heard of some people playing this game on like GT 710s and stuff. So 750 Ti theoretically should be able to play it, but I had this issue with my i7 4770K system as well as the Ryzen 7 5700G system, and it never recovered from this. And that's been it. This was a huge video. I'm sorry about the length of it, but at least we covered 22 graphics cards with gameplay and everything. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope it was informative to you. I'm sorry if I missed your particular GPU. Again, I will be making more videos in the future in this game. Well, I'm just gonna get out of here now. Thanks very much for watching. Love you all. Bye-bye.